They believed your departure would be a silent footnote, a ripple that cost them nothing. That you would retreat, mend your own heart, and wait for their call to return. But what if I told you the truest path is not in disappearing? What if the stillness you cultivate becomes a force they never learn to face? Most people see absence as a void, a sign of retreat. But an ancient wisdom teaches us something different. True silence is not an empty space, it is a profound presence. When practiced from a place of clarity, it does not simply cause regret. It dissolves the very ground of their perceived control. You are about to understand how your stillness, born of inner calm, becomes the loudest truth in the room. The ones who let you go so easily are the same ones who will quietly come undone when they can no longer reach your energy. If you are tired of the endless cycle of waiting, explaining, of seeking to be seen, then your journey begins here. Walk this path with us. Here, we do not turn pain into a weapon. We alchemize it into strength. We do not turn silence into a tactic. We find in it a sanctuary. If they treated your heart like a passing season, I invite you to stay, for the wisdom we are about to explore will forever change the space you occupy in their memory, and more importantly, in your own life. The severing of a connection often happens in a deep hush, no final argument, no climactic scene, just a fading away. And the most difficult part of this journey, you are left standing in the silence, trying to find its meaning, while they appear to walk on, unburdened. Then comes the advice you hear from every corner: go into solitude, sever all ties, become invisible, block them, remain quiet, with the hope that maybe, just maybe, the silence will become a drum they can finally hear. But the days turn into weeks, and your chosen silence is met with more silence. And this gives birth to a new kind of suffering. When you remove yourself in the hope of being missed, and you are not, your absence becomes a hollow chamber within you, a void that echoes with unanswered questions, a space that does not heal. You step back, and their life continues, a river flowing on, as if you were never a stone in its path. Nothing changes for them. What the world has forgotten to tell you is that disappearing is a language that has lost its meaning. The landscape is crowded with souls who vanish, block, and then return. It is now a predictable dance, and what is predictable has no power. It causes no tremor. It carries no weight. If silence was once a sharp blade of emotional truth, its edge has been dulled by overuse. Everyone expects it, especially those who were careless with your heart. They have already mapped your retreat. They are emotionally braced for it. Your absence no longer touches them. This is why the act of simply disappearing is no longer the path. The true practice must go deeper than just severing contact. The path is not to vanish from their life, but to become unreachable in your own center. It is not a physical departure, it is an energetic one. Have you ever felt this? You might see someone from a distance, but their very energy, the wellspring from which they live, has shifted. The way they carry themselves, the stillness behind their eyes, a quiet dignity that needs no witness. Suddenly, a soul who was once completely open has become a placid lake, deep and undisturbed. That is what awakens the soul. Here, the first foundations of their ego begin to crack. Not because you left, but because you remained in a new way. You are not broadcasting pain, loss, or sorrow. You are radiating a calm neutrality, a peace that does not block, does not chase, does not explain. This stillness lands with more force, because you are still visible, yet you are not there for their consumption. You exist, you breathe, you move, but your river of energy no longer flows in their direction. You have become a reflection that offers no image back, an echo that has learned stillness. This is what unsettles their spirit. Here, your presence transforms. It ceases to be a gift to them and becomes a quiet reminder. A reminder that you still walk this earth, but you are no longer their shore to land upon. Not emotionally, not energetically. This contradiction creates a profound unease, for there is no simple story they can tell themselves. When you disappear, they can say they are hurt. But when you remain calm and spiritually inaccessible, there is nothing for their mind to grasp. You have not left, yet you are already gone. You are right there, yet beyond their reach. This is the paradox that slowly erodes their certainty. This is where the true transformation begins. Not when you disappear, but when you evolve. When you cease to participate in the drama. When you shift in silence, not as a punishment, but as a form of sacred self-protection. When you no longer offer your energy for explanation. When you cease to react and simply continue on your path with peace. So if you thought silence was the destination, perhaps you mistook the map for the territory. The real journey happens within. It is not about leaving a room. It is about becoming the silent, immovable mountain within that room. Even if they still stand before you, they cannot touch the source of your peace. This path leaves no outward scars, but it gently dissolves illusions. For nothing creates more space for truth than a soul who stays physically present, but has reclaimed their energetic sovereignty. It forces them to face a truth they never prepared for. You are no longer trying. And they can feel that shift in the very air around you. If this journey resonates within you, I invite you to walk with us. Each week, we explore new paths of silent strength, of strategic presence, of rebuilding the inner temple for those who are done seeking warmth from fires that were never meant for them. There comes a point of awareness when you see that your absence no longer disturbs their water. They have learned to navigate their world without you. It is no longer a shock, no longer disorienting. It has become a part of the pattern they expected, a rhythm they learned long before you took your first step back. To disappear once held weight. There was a time your absence would leave an imprint. Now, it is merely the sound of the wind, because the person who took your presence for granted has adapted. They have studied your currents. They know the silence is coming. They have built inner walls against it. They even anticipate it. They will quiet down soon. They tell themselves. They always do. Then they will flow back when the storm passes. And this story they tell themselves renders your disappearance harmless, predictable, easy to dismiss. You have been rehearsed in their mind so many times that no shock remains. When another soul rehearses your absence in this way, they do not fear your loss. They fear nothing, because deep down, they never believed your silence was a permanent shift in the river's course. They have learned to sit through your storms without getting wet. That is the nature of emotional preparation. So when you withdraw, expecting to create an earthquake, what you find is stillness. A cold, quiet stillness. Not because they are without feeling, but because they are no longer surprised. You have become a character in their play, the dramatic pause before your inevitable return. And that is when it dawns on you, this form of silence no longer works. It is no longer a declaration. It is a background hum, expected, managed, and filed away as a temporary state. Your energetic retreat has lost its sacred sting, and the more you repeat the dance, the safer they feel in their own story. It is a harsh awakening to realize that what once made them tremble now barely causes them to blink. Not because they are stronger, but because you have become spiritually predictable. You handed them the map to your heart's reactions, and they learned to walk the terrain without losing their footing. That is the turning point. That is when your own energy must shift, because silence without transformation is invisible. You cease to be a mystery. You cease to be missed. Not because you are unworthy, but because you are performing the same ritual. When you withdraw only to be noticed, they sense it. When you become silent but carry the hope of being pursued, they feel your anchor. And they do not move, because they know that as long as you wait for them, you are still bound to them, still offering your power. But something changes. Something fundamentally shifts when you stop running away and begin walking forward. When you stop making silence a tool and instead allow it to be a reflection of your own inner growth. You do not hide, you blossom. You do not punish, you evolve. That is the path that holds true power. They expect your silence to whisper, "Please see me." They never expect it to declare, "I no longer need to be seen by you." And in that profound shift from waiting to walking, your absence finally becomes real. Not loud, not angry, just solid, quiet, unreachable. That is the part of the journey they never prepared for. Because they were ready for your tears. They were ready for your confusion. They were ready for your disappearing act, followed by a gentle return. But they were not ready for your calm. They were not ready for your peace, for the version of you that walks on without looking back. That version of you, the one who does not flinch, does not explain, does not grasp for attention. That is the version that breaks the spell they wove. That is the version that changes the flow of the story. Because now they are the ones left watching in silence, uncertain of the path back to you. And in a sacred paradox, it is not the volume of your silence that makes an impact. It is the clarity of your presence in your own life. It is the way you fill your days without seeking their reflection. It is the truth that your energy no longer chases, no longer retreats, it simply stands. That energy, that stillness, that peace, that is a new language they do not speak, and it humbles them. Not because you left, but because this time, you did not leave a door ajar. You did not leave a trail of crumbs for them to follow. You simply changed the direction of your own sacred path. No more waiting, no more checking for who watches your journey. No more holding your breath for a sense of closure that never arrives from the outside. You are no longer playing a game of hiding and seeking. You are building an inner temple, and that sacred space is the part of you they can no longer touch. Sometimes the most powerful practice is not to disappear, but to remain silently, steadily, without offering your energy. You do not leave, you do not block, you do not run. But you also do not respond, do not explain, and do not invite connection into your inner world. And precisely that, is what stills their storm. People who rely on emotional currents need your reactions to survive. They are nourished by your patterns, the replies, the justifications. When you vanish, they wait. When you return, they continue. But when you remain without participating, that is when the ground beneath them shifts. Imagine someone at a chess table, but you simply cease to move your pieces. You are still there, your presence is felt, but you are unmoved. No reaction, no counterplay, no drama, just presence. That kind of silence, it brings a profound unease to those who depend on control. Because when you stay emotionally centered, when you do not chase or provoke, the control they thought they had begins to dissolve, and they have no practice for that. Your stillness becomes the loudest message you could ever send. It says, I see you, but you are no longer the force that moves me. This shift is subtle but profound. You are still visible, still in their world, but unreachable at your core. You did not disappear. You simply stopped leaking your life force in their direction, and that quiet withdrawal of energetic fuel begins to suffocate their illusion of influence. They expect energetic withdrawal to be dramatic. They prepare for block numbers, for angry words, for long explanations. But they never expect serenity. They never expect you to remain present and yet untouched. That is the part of the puzzle they cannot solve. You might still exist in the same space. You might even cross paths, but your energy no longer bends toward them, no longer offers itself up. You speak when it is necessary. You act with grace. And when provoked, you offer not resistance, but a deep, abiding silence. This is not coldness, it is clarity. It is the mastery of your own inner state. That clarity is your shield, and to someone who was accustomed to moving you, it is unbearable, because it shows them their old ways no longer find purchase. Their words do not land. Their gestures no longer pull you back. They cast a line, and you simply do not bite. It is like throwing stones into a perfectly calm lake and expecting waves, but watching as not a single ripple forms. That stillness, that calm, that refusal to be disturbed, it is a language they do not speak, and that is what begins to unravel their sense of power. This is where they begin to question everything. Why are they not reacting? Why did they not answer? Why do they seem at peace? These questions become their own inner storm, because they are not witnessing pain or effort. They are witnessing peace, and they cannot touch it. And what truly breaks their illusion is not your absence, but your neutrality. It is the fact that you did not disappear. You simply detached your inner world from theirs, and in doing so, you turned their game board upside down. You are there, but unavailable. Present, but out of reach. Think of it as changing the lock on your house without an announcement. They still hold the old key, but it no longer opens your door, and that realization brings a quiet panic, because they now understand that access to you was never their right. It was a privilege, and they lost it in silence. They begin to test the waters, a like, a message, a random comment, a question disguised as casualness. But you do not bite. You do not punish either. You simply exist without leaning in. And that restraint, that silent strength, that is what dissolves their grip. You have stopped feeding the cycle. You have walked out of the arena without a fight. And now they are left calling into a void, trying to stir an energy that no longer lives for their attention. You have walked away with your spirit without moving your feet. That is the difference between absence and presence without access. Absence is easy for them to narrate, but presence without permission, that is much harder, because they see you thriving, breathing, living, but not for them. That reality burns. And while they are spinning, trying to decode your silence, you have already moved into a new landscape, one where you do not need their validation, where your calm speaks more loudly than any reaction ever could. And they hear it, loud and clear. At first, they observe from a distance, feeling confident. Your stillness, your quiet. They told themselves your silence was a passing storm, temporary. But then the seasons changed, and your spirit did not flow back toward them. That is when their curiosity deepened into something else, a quiet panic. They begin to scan your path, your stories, your subtle signals, waiting for a hidden message, a song, a quote, an image, anything that suggests you still feel, that you still look back, that you are still wounded. But there is nothing, no coded messages, no bitter undercurrents, no emotional crumbs for them to feed on. Just freedom, a kind of peace they were not prepared to witness. Your digital silence is not a tool to provoke, it is a wall to protect your inner garden. You are not performing your pain, you are simply living in your own truth. And that unsettles them more than any argument could, because they can no longer map your inner world. There are no clues, no codes, no half-spoken truths to dissect. And the more they search for the old you, the more they realize they have lost access, not just to your life, but to your heart. You see, others do not panic when you are angry. They panic when they can no longer read you, when your path becomes unpredictable, when your energy feels like a distant mountain. Emotional manipulators thrive on knowing the next step in the dance. But now, you are off their map. They search and search, looking for you between the lines, hoping your silence is still about them. But nothing connects. Your life no longer revolves around the empty space they left. Your peace does not require their presence. That disconnect begins to echo in their own mind. It begins with a subtle thought. Perhaps they are just hiding their pain well. But it does not end there. Days pass, still no signs of struggle, no slips, no passive gestures. And that is when the thought becomes a whisper. What if they have truly moved on? That whisper grows. It finds its way into their ego. What if I no longer matter to their journey? And once that question lands, it spreads like a quiet fire. Because until now, they had always assumed your silence was emotional, a sign of attachment. Now, they are not so sure. And it is not just what you are not saying, it is what you are doing instead. Living with a new lightness, sharing beauty without a trace of sorrow. You do not look like someone trying to be well. You look like someone who simply is well. That contrast strikes them deeply. They expected to see a struggle, an obvious void in your life's pattern. But you are not limping, you are flying. And it is not a performance. It is simply what happens when peace finally takes the place of longing. The silence that once seemed passive now feels like true distance. Not the kind that waits to be closed, but the kind that cannot be crossed. And that is the distance that dissolves the illusion of their own importance. Slowly, quietly, completely. Now, They start to wonder if the power they felt over you was merely a projection, if the control they thought they had was borrowed, if maybe, just maybe, they were not the reason for your silence, but the catalyst for your healing. And that thought cuts deeper than any confrontation, because it does not just say you are gone, it says you have outgrown the need for them. It whispers that their chapter in your story has ended, not with a scream, but with stillness, not with a slammed door, but with a simple step forward. And when someone who once felt central to your universe realizes they are no longer even a footnote, it bruises the part of them they never show the world, their pride, their identity, their belief that they were irreplaceable. Because they thought your silence was about your pain, but now they begin to understand your silence was about your liberation. And that revelation quietly breaks something inside them. Because they are not just witnessing your absence, they are witnessing your freedom. The pain once had a home inside you. It sat with you in the quiet of the night. It walked with you as you revisited old conversations. It was the whisper in your ear when hope was met with silence. But that pain has slowly, quietly moved out. And now it has a new residence. Because now they are the ones walking in circles, wandering, scanning your every digital footprint, searching for a sign of weakness, of attachment, of an old wound that hasn't closed. But what they see is emptiness, not in you, but in the space where they used to be. You did not erupt, you did not plead, you did not block or scream or send a final declaration of your worth. You simply stopped explaining, stopped reaching, stopped offering access to a soul who did not know how to hold it. And that silence, so clean and unburdened, now echoes within them. At first, they believed it was just another current in your river, a pause, a quiet protest. But time continued its journey, and your silence did not change its color. It did not soften. It remained. That is when they understood this was not a phase. This was a turning point, a shift in the earth they did not see coming. Because for the first time, your silence did not carry hope. It carried finality. And nothing is more humbling to a soul accustomed to being forgiven. Now the roles have been gently reversed. You are not the one waiting for a final word, they are. You are not the one holding on, they are. You are not the one suffering in confusion, they are. And the silence, the very same energy they once used as a tool, is now the landscape they must navigate. Because silence is easy to dismiss when it is filled with emotion. But when silence becomes neutral, centered, almost peaceful, it becomes unbearable. They cannot argue with it. They cannot fix it. They are left sitting with their own echo. They start to remember the moments they brushed aside, the careless words, the times you reached out and they retreated. And those memories, once weightless to them, now return with substance. Because now they understand that was the last time you would try. They are not haunted by what you said. They are haunted by all that you did not. The conversations you no longer start, the energy you no longer offer, the doors you closed without a sound, the calm that replaced your inner storm. And while they sit in their own silence, hoping you will reach out again, a deeper part of them knows this is different. You are not punishing them. You have simply disconnected the current. And that realization begins to ache in places they did not know could feel. The panic arrives quietly. It is not a loud or dramatic storm. It reveals itself in the way they check your digital presence and find nothing directed at them. In the way their messages remain unopened. In the way your name fades from their world and does not return. That is when they start to feel it. Not because you left, but because you did not try to come back. You did not ask for their understanding. You did not make one final appeal to their heart. And that absence of noise, that is what cuts deepest. They start reaching out, perhaps not directly, but through subtle gestures alike, a shared memory, a random message after weeks of quiet. But your response is no longer a given. Your silence now has sacred boundaries, and your peace has become untouchable. They are finally feeling the weight that you once carried, not because you sought revenge, but because healing has consequences. One of them is clarity. And clarity creates space, a space they no longer know how to inhabit. That is where their true unease begins. And the most devastating part for them. It is not the silence itself. It is the realization that this time, you are not watching your screen. You are not checking to see if they noticed. You are not counting the hours since your last exchange. You have stopped waiting entirely. That is what breaks the spell. Not your absence, but your indifference. Not your distance, but your peace. Because now the pain resides with them, quiet, heavy, and unending. And nothing they do seems to find a way back to you. There comes a moment when your silence becomes more than just distance. It becomes a mirror, and the one who once dismissed you is now forced to look at what they have done, not through confrontation, not through your words, but through the person you have become now that they are no longer in control. You no longer plead, you no longer explain, you no longer show signs of a spiritual life tied to their actions. And everything they try now lands in a place that no longer reacts. The emotional triggers they used to pull are no longer connected to you. The game has ended, but they did not receive the memo. They send a message hoping to create tension. They post something designed to spark jealousy. They create situations that used to draw you in, but what they find now is stillness, indifference. Not forced, not performed, but real. And that emptiness where a reaction used to live, that is where their mind now spins. Because what they are witnessing is not anger, it is absence. Not of your presence, but of your participation. You are not punishing them. You have simply stepped out of the arena. You are no longer playing the role they assigned to you. You used to be the one who replayed moments, who watched every signal, who searched between every line for meaning. But now, the only thing you are watching is your own inner peace. You are not ignoring them to provoke. You have simply stopped looking in their direction. That is what disorients them. They believed they had time. They believed you would always be energetically available. They thought they could leave the door to your heart open and you would keep standing in the hall. But now the hallway is empty and the door leads to a sacred, inner space they cannot enter. They start to see this new self and it unsettles them. Not because you are angry, but because you are clear. You have become a reflection of everything they let go. And seeing you like that, strong, calm, distant, forces them to see their role in your becoming. You carry no bitterness, you cast no blame, but your silence says everything they do not want to hear. I am not who I was, and I am not returning to that version of myself. And for someone who once thrived on being the center of your universe, that truth is unbearable. Now, when they try to re-enter your world, they find nothing familiar. The doors to your energy do not open in the same way. The warmth is gone, not replaced by cold, but simply no longer available to them. What they once knew is no longer there, and the version of you that remains does not bend. They try to play the old game's subtle messages, guilt tactics, memories dangled like offerings. But the rules have changed, and more importantly, the other player has left. There is no audience, no applause, no performance. Just stillness. That is what they cannot handle. The stage used to be theirs. They used to set the rhythm. But now the stage is empty, the lights are off, and you are not sitting in the front row anymore, waiting for their next move. You have left the theater entirely. And with it, you have reclaimed your own story. It is a strange kind of pain, the one that does not come from being left, but from realizing you are no longer needed. That is what they feel now. The quiet collapse of a power they did not know they were leaning on, one that no longer exists. And the most piercing part of it all, it is not what you have said, it is what you have not. No dramatic final act, no explosive ending, just the gentle finality of a chapter that closed itself, a decision that did not ask for permission, a peace that does not seek their validation. You do not return to prove a point. You do not return to show them what they lost, because true growth does not perform. It simply moves forward. And when they look at you now, they do not see someone trying to win. They see someone who already won by no longer needing to play. Every attempt they now make to pull you back feels like a blow to their own pride. A reaction they once expected with certainty now meets only empty air, just the immovable presence of a soul who no longer bends to their rhythm. That is what finally breaks them. Now you have become calm, but not passive, present, but not available. Your stillness is no longer a waiting room, it is a sacred boundary. Your silence does not scream for attention, it radiates peace. And peace, to a soul accustomed to creating chaos, is terrifying. They send a message, perhaps a single symbol. They like an old memory, hoping to trigger something familiar. They try to provoke a response with hollow words or nostalgic games, but nothing lands, because the version of you that once chased no longer exists. Your energy is now a closed gate. They can see the garden within, but they cannot walk through it. And that hurts in ways they will never admit, because they realize with each unanswered attempt that they lost access to the best part of you. Not your presence, but your openness. You did not become cold, you became precise. And with that precision came a profound power, the power to observe without reacting, to exist without seeking, to remain without clinging. And that level of presence, that is the consequence they never saw coming. Now they wander through the same spaces where your attention once nourished them and find only stillness. Not because you vanished, but because you detached. You are there, but not for them. And that is a deeper truth than words could ever deliver. They used to know the way to your heart, what to say, when to say it. But now, every attempt is a step in the dark. Every move they make is met with your quiet resolve. You have become the living consequence of every moment they assumed you would never walk away. And it was not rage that made you leave, it was clarity. The kind of clarity that needs no revenge. Only stillness, only silence. Only a life that no longer places them at its center. And now they sit before your calm like someone locked outside a home they never thought could close. A door that once opened every time they knocked. But this time, the handle does not turn. The welcome mat is gone. And so is the part of you that used to wait there. Not in body, but in spirit. You are no longer hiding, you are shining. But your light no longer warms them. It simply exists, without invitation, without explanation. And that untouchable presence, that is the wound they now carry. Because nothing dissolves a person's ego like realizing they no longer know how to get your attention. And nothing confuses them more than seeing you at peace without needing a single thing from them, not even an ending. They used to feel like the sun in your sky, but now your world has found its own center. Your focus has returned to your own heart. Your silence is no longer a tactic, it is a state of being. One they cannot break, cannot reach, cannot touch. And in that untouchable stillness, they finally feel what they once made you feel. Because the truth is humbling. Those who did not know how to protect you now do not even know how to approach you. So now the question is not whether they will return, it is whether you will still be there if they do. And whether they will even recognize the person you have become. Because the silence they once dismissed has been the soil for your transformation. You no longer explain, you no longer perform, and you no longer chase anyone who could not see your light the first time. But here is the path that matters most. Will you continue to grow, or will you allow their return to pull you back into the old dance? Because they will return. Perhaps not with words, but with a glance, a like, a small message asking how you are. The true practice is not about what they do, it is about what you do next. Have you found the strength to remain in your calm, to remain on your new path? If you felt that shift within you, if this message stirred something in your heart, do not let it fade. Let it be your turning point. Use this silence not to wait, but to rebuild your inner temple. And before you continue your journey, I invite you to subscribe and join our community. Each week, you will find new wisdom to alchemize heartbreak into spiritual strength and silence into your most sacred sanctuary.